fellow Americans.
You might be wondering, why in the world is there a 30-minute countdown before the show starts? Well, we actually start live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, so this whole 30-minute countdown is a chance for YouTube and Rumble to send out their alerts and notifications, so we encourage you to gather up and hang out with everyone in the chat room. So every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time is when we do this show live. You can join us for the countdown if you like, or just set your clock and reminder that at 4 p.m. Eastern is when we go live. You can also make sure you subscribe and turn on that bell notification, so hopefully you will get a notification.
What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying. I really am surprised that people feel that it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to.
Who are shouting? Just a moment.
I'm not defending him in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print.
What was your percentage of success?
We were pretty successful in planting information of a rather rarefied nature. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. That's data derived from radio intercepts, spy in the sky photography. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually, the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. Go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across, which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plant in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate.
Frank, a two-part question. What were the objectives of what was the objective of the CIA? What about the moral implications of what you were doing in feeding disinformation? Did the objective override the moral implications, moral problems?
Well, the objective of the agency in general is to generate intelligence and get it back to Washington, to get at the truth and make sure the policymakers understand it. When you plant disinformation, you are diverging from that objective, and I think probably in retrospect it was very counterproductive. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose. Propagandizing the American public or Congress is not the CIA's job. As to the morality of what the CIA was doing or that particular activity, the war was a very relative thing. It was a relativist environment, and morality seldom came into play when you were operating in the field. In my estimation, a CIA man should be amoral. That may sound pretty shocking to somebody, but what if my morality were that of a Nazi or agent, if you will? You wouldn't want me to be your intelligence officer. Keep the morals out of intelligence. Keep the truth in, and stay away from disinformation.
It would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
And it might sound radical, colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun, it's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organisation should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
We become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country. It is when there's a connectivity to a threat to our country. It could be a threat, a connectivity to violence. And what this working group does, is precisely what I would think you would want it to do, which is to take a look at the work, the disinformation work that our department has done, and ask the following questions. Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have standards?
But here's the problem. We can't even agree. We can't even agree what disinformation is. You can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossier. If you can't agree to that, how are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Senator, I have 2 points, if I may finish. Number one, that what this office, what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals.
So do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want you guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
You would know this this is a bit of an aside, but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
We had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth, and that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks.
Are you worried about
Hey everyone, just as a reminder, our show starts at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, just a few minutes from now, but I should remind you that we have a daily newsletter. It's totally free. Natalie and I work very hard on it every morning over a cup of coffee, putting the stories together that we think are important that the mainstream media is going to ignore. All you need to do is go to our website. It's just redacted.inc. Put in your email address. We won't ever sell your email to anybody. And then you'll receive a welcome email. And all you need to do is verify that email, and 7 a.m. Eastern Time is when we send out our daily newsletter. And it's about 5 or 10 minutes in length that you can read it over your cup of coffee. And like I said, we cover 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day, plus a couple of things you might have missed while you were sleeping. We try to have some fun with it, add a little humor into it. And again, it's a great way to start off your morning. But it's also a great way for us to stay connected with you as well, because we've been banned and blocked on some of these platforms before, where we haven't been allowed to post anything, not even a community post. So the only way for us to stay connected with you is through our newsletter. We were able to send out a newsletter and say, hey everyone, we're blocked for the next week, and let you know what was actually going on with our show. Anyway, go to redacted.inc and sign up for the free newsletter, and it'll be posted first thing in the morning over your cup of coffee.
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. The media could have stopped it if they had searched deep enough. If they hadn't reprinted government propaganda, they could have stopped it. But what does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment.
You killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed 1 million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war
George,
after
if
what
I
you've
was
already
still in
done.
Parliament,
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be in the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean to the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the president now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the majors. The majors' assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the president have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone. Or to take the nation to war partway, or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip, because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector. You didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in. So what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of, you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, They get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a sec." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." I said, "We're going to war with Iraq? Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, "I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Hey everyone, Clayton here. The show is going to start at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I should remind you that we have a VIP community. It's our Redacted Rebel VIP community. Now, this show is totally free, what you're watching right now, right? You can subscribe here on YouTube and Rumble, totally free. But if you'd like to support independent journalism, we are run by you. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this show. We wouldn't be able to hire the team that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the servers that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the reporters that we have, the team that we have. So you can support us by going to redacted.inc, and on the right side of your screen, you'll see a VIP community button. Just click that, and for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support us. We put out exclusive content, early interviews that no one else will see, live streams just for our VIP Rebel community. So again, it's totally free to watch this show, but if you do want to support independent journalism, we would really appreciate it. Come on over to redacted.inc, click on that community button, and decide if you want to sign up or not. It's totally up to you. We thank you. And meanwhile, the show will start in just a few moments at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
Well, one of the 4 principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories. For example, in my war, the Angola war that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. Ironically, it's called covert action inside the CIA. Outside, that means the violent part. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa, and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Time, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he had gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Time. We had the complicity of the government of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, if you will, to put these false stories into his newspapers. But after that point, the journalists, Reuters and AFP, the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was, and we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. In one case, we had the Cuban rapists caught and tried by the Ovimbundu maidens who had been their victims, and then we ran photographs that made almost every newspaper in the country of the Cubans being executed by the Ovimbunda women who supposedly had been their victims.
These were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort of totally false propaganda.
The only reason that I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome, everybody, to Redacted this Thursday. This is the 13th of July. This is the last Redacted episode you get with only one host. Clayton is scheduled to be back on Monday. So those of you who have all sorts of speculations of why you're only getting one Redacted host, it's just for a planned vacation, or as they say in Europe, a holiday, not because we had a fight, or at least not because of that. So I will be glad to have him back. But for today, it's just me, plus the boys in the control room. We have Philip and David, Grim, who never talks. Hello. But you are in good hands, I promise you. So thanks for sticking with us all week. We have a lot of news to get to today. We're going to talk about the escalation in Kosovo between the Serbs and people of Kosovo, the ethnic Serbs that live there, whether or not there is rising tension there. The president of Serbia, President Vučić, says that the Prime Minister of Kosovo wants to be the next Zelensky. I don't know if that's something to aspire to. We're going to talk about that as a career path. If that were my child, I probably would say, let's rethink this. But let's see where that is heading us and whether or not it will bring us another NATO type battle to be drug into. Also, we're going to talk about what does this war in Ukraine actually mean for Ukrainian soldiers. We have a new report out showing that morale is at an all-time low. They're scared. They don't want to be there. They've been dragged off the streets and put into a dangerous position. All the more reason that we should support peace talks. Plus, a new round of Twitter files shows us, I know this is so shocking, that the FBI was trying to censor Twitter. Stop me if you've heard this one before. Now, I know you know this story. I know you know it's true, but it never hurts to look at what is happening with agencies run by your tax dollars. So we're going to go over those Twitter files by Matt Taibbi. Plus, we have more from the the Senate Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic, showing once again that Dr. Fauci had doctored a research paper. Get it? Doctored a research paper. So when we were told to follow the science, well, they were making up science to let us know that COVID did not come from a lab when we were all not allowed to say that. We have more to show you about how that happened, how they put the cart before the horse, so to speak. So all that and more as Redacted starts right now. All right. Thank you again for joining us tonight on this my last solo show, at least of the summer. That's my anticipation. You never know. But yes, thank you for sticking with me for these last 2 weeks and showing Clayton that I can handle it. But I will be so glad when he comes back. Is he in the chat, by the way? I see people in the chat saying hi to him. If you see Clayton in the chat, give me a fart emoji just to let me know that you've seen him.
Possibly. There was some rumblings about some people spotting him in Cleveland, Ohio. So
okay, he's in trouble if he's in Cleveland.
He was
not
wearing
supposed
a red
to be
and white
there.
striped shirt and a red and white striped hat, they said.
Okay.
So.
Maybe it was one of the clones, like the clone companies that make Joe Biden's and put them all over the place.
It could be.
My sister 100% believes that that is true and sends me all kinds of different pictures. Of this is not a road I've gone down. You're free to send me stuff all you want. We're not going to report that here on the show. That for me is just one thing too far. For now, you never know, right? I'm curious about everything. Everything the
Until
media
the
doesn't want to.
falls off.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I'm being jokey right now. That's not real news. We are going to get to real news. Let me tell you where else you can find real news is on our newsletter. The newsletter comes out every day, Monday through Thursday, every day that this show comes out. And it features the same topics that we talk about right here. We also make sure that we link you to original links or as close to it as we can get so that you can do your own studying. You can read these things for yourself. All you have to do is give us your email address and click subscribe because it's a free subscription. And then you're off to the races. Make sure that you authenticate that email and we will send you news every single day. that we do in the morning. So for us, as our time goes, we write the newsletter in the morning and we come to you in the evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. And we very much thank you for subscribing to those free programs because we very much appreciate it and we work really hard on it. So without further ado, I do see fart emojis. So probably Clayton has, in fact, been spotted in the chat, but I don't know about Cleveland. I don't know. But he will be in this very chair on Monday, God willing. So let's go ahead and get the stories today. Kosovo. Have you seen this meme from The Simpsons predicting a war between Kosovo and Serbia in the autumn of 2023? That's weird, especially on all of the news that The Simpsons continues to predict things that are true, such as the Titan sub. There was an episode where a submarine was lost in the Titanic and running out of air and stuck somewhere. Not only, though, on this episode about the war between Serbia and Kosovo in the autumn of 2023, which we are quickly approaching, but in the same episode, in that same year, The Simpsons go to the theater where a movie called Oppenheimer is playing. This is the year 2023. There is a movie named Oppenheimer playing. I don't know what to make of this, you guys. I am not sure if The Simpsons are just a quantum leap of time and space. I don't know. I do know today, though, that tensions are increasing between Kosovo and Serbia. This was parliamentary session today in Kosovo. Watch.
Ju lutem policia brenda kuvendit.
All right. So that's hardcore, right? What was happening, what you saw just there, was Prime Minister Albin Kurti speaking. He's an opposition, and he's a prime minister. An opposition lawmaker threw water on him, and then all hell broke loose. Men, women, didn't matter. They all dived right in. The prime minister had been speaking about government measures to diffuse tensions with ethnic Serbs in the north of the country. Now, tensions have been high since recent elections in which ethnic Serbs in the region just sat out the elections in protest, which meant they had a turnout of a paltry 4% of the population voting. Now, in May, as tensions began to grow in the wake of those elections, NATO started sending in what they call peacekeepers or troops to choose a side. The side of NATO is on the side of Kosovo. By some accounts, there have been up to 700 NATO troops already stationed there. Now, NATO says that Serbia must recognize the independence of Kosovo, which Serbia does not. So does that mean we should all recognize the independence of Crimea and the Donbass in Ukraine? No, that's different. NATO does not feel that way. They just...
No, we don't do consistency in the U.S. We don't do consistency in our government.
Or in NATO.
We can't do that.
Or in Western-led wars. You're right.
Well, unless you consider the consistent corruption. That is consistent.
Or consistently inconsistent, right? Some people can choose to be independent if we feel like that serves our purpose. There may now be another election in Kosovo, though, in order to sort of legitimize this government. Just today, Kosovo President Osmani was reportedly in talks by the French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz at the European Political Community Summit, and they talked him into perhaps running another election. Now, why, you ask yourself, would he allow the German and French governments to tell him what to do? Well, according to Serbian President Alexander Vučić, it's because the Prime Minister of Kosovo wants to be the new Zelensky. This is something he's been warning us about repeatedly. I don't know that if my children said that was a life ambition, I might talk them out of being the new Zelensky, but everyone's got a goal, right? To each his own. Earlier this month, President Vučić said this, and this is at least the second time that I've seen him say this. He says that Kurti just wants to be the new Zelensky. While the offensive of Ukraine starts, you'll see an additional offensive of Kurti in the Republic of Kosovo. I ask the people of the Republic of Kosovo to be careful, to just take shelter for a while. I'm afraid that this terror will become even fiercer. So let's draw these parallels, shall we? Ethnic Russians in the Donbass have been being attacked since 2014 by the Ukrainian military because they opposed Western alliance by the Maidan coup. So in Kosovo, now ethnic Serbs who live there and do not recognize Kosovo as an independent place are, I want to say, prejudiced against by people who feel that Kosovo should be independent. So if you can make yourself a Zelensky, then you got a fight on your hands that you can sell the Western world, right? And so what he's warning there is that this guy wants to be the new Zelensky, make his war, let's say, Vogue cover worthy, and that this will, in fact, make it safe for the ethnic Serbs who live there. So this is what's happening there in terms of escalating tensions. He seems to think that Vučić seems to think it will simmer down. I don't know on what basis he thinks that will be happening. And because once NATO is there, we'll see. If NATO makes a Zelensky out of Kurti, then NATO will simultaneously be fighting against independence in Donbass and for independence in Kosovo. So yes, I think we've drawn out that contradiction. So are the Simpsons right about predicting world events, and will there in fact be an ethnic war in Kosovo supported by NATO? We'll have to wait and see. So let us know what your thoughts are on this rising conflict. I hope to have a guest on about this to further explain these rising tensions. The American ambassador in Kosovo has spoken out and said, this is not a good thing. Violence is not supported. But we will see. We'll see if the West decides to draw a line, or if this is maybe not the sexy war that they need right now. We know that it's not about budget, because the United States will print money in order to funnel it into NATO, into wars. That's not a problem. It's not that we can't afford it. I mean, come on. It's war. There's always money for war. Like there's always room for Jell-O. Remember that saying?
There's always money in the banana stand.
I don't know that one. Did you just make that up?
No, you don't know Arrested Development?
Arrested Development.
I did watch Arrested Development. I missed one. Okay.
Yeah.
Always
That
money
was
in the
like
banana
one of the most
stand.
famous, always money in the banana stand.
Okay. Especially as it relates to things we absolutely want, like warfare. So if you were from this region, let me know what you thought of our analysis tonight, or if you have something else that you'd like to point us to, because this is something that we want to continue to watch, especially because of this warning. The idea that there should be another Zelensky says to me, well, what does that say to you? The new Zelensky? Does it say to you? To me, it says a new propaganda figure. That's sort of what that means to me. What do you think that means, David?
Yeah, I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. I mean, the thing is, though, you got, can we have a new Zelensky with the old Zelensky still there? Or do we have to get rid of the old Zelensky and just, stop sending money to Ukraine and start sending it to Kosovo then? Is that how that works? Or can we have two of them? Can we have
that
two?
wouldn't work. You have to have just the one. I don't know.
Maybe just Ukraine just absorbs Kosovo and Zelensky runs both, and win-win.
I mean, we were sold simultaneously Afghanistan and Iraq. So anything's, never put it past the war machine, the propaganda war machine. So I guess, if you have a strong enough bad guy, they don't have a Putin to put up against a Zelensky in that region. Vučić is quite popular with his own people and hasn't done anything that America can really hold up against him yet, as far as I know. There was a scandal I read about soccer. I can't repeat it at this. I'd have to do a little digging about it. But nevertheless, I would prefer not to be sold any more wars. Let me know what you think in the chat. So we have a lot more news to get to. We have a special report from new Redacted correspondent Mike Jones, who's going to tell us about some of the research he's done on the state of the military in Ukraine and just how despondent and depressed they've been. Has been shown certain documents showing just how many Ukrainian soldiers want to defect and how awful their morale is, because it's terrifying and they're untrained and they are not set up for success. So I'm excited to show you that interview. We did that earlier in the day. Plus we have another Twitter files to go over, plus another report from the Senate Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic showing how Dr. Fauci and his colleagues influenced a paper about the lab leak and then influenced what we could say about it. In this paper, they're called the Bethesda Boys, like the boys who worked in and around Maryland. It's like kind of like the Bethesda Boys, what they were up to. It sort of speaks to this way we feel maybe collectively manipulated by Dr. Fauci, and some evidence shows that was true. So first, though, we want to tell you about our friends over at Moomoo, because if you're an investor looking for an easier way to trade stocks, would you like 16 free stocks? With Moomoo, our favorite trading platform, there's no steep learning curve. It has a simple interface and is easy to use, so even beginners can take advantage of the stock market in no time. Plus, it offers powerful tools, often reserved for experienced investors, like customizable watch lists and advanced charting capabilities. And now Moomoo has even added a powerful new earnings calendar, so you don't have to hunt and peck trying to find the earnings schedule for your favorite companies. So right now, for a limited time, Moomoo is giving away 16 free stocks when you open your account to make your initial deposits until July 16th. That's just a few days away. So even if you never do anything with the account, you get to keep those free stocks. Moomoo has 0 commission trades, and the app looks amazing on every platform, from iOS to Android to Windows and Mac. Moomoo can help you trade with its advanced tools like their stock screener and earnings calendar. No matter what your level of skill is, you'll find fantastic tools that can help you trade. So open your free account today. Get access to 0 commission trades plus 16 free stocks when you open your account and make that initial deposit. To learn more, check out our link at redacted.inc/Moomoo. One more time, that's redacted.inc/Moomoo. Well, 6 weeks into the counteroffensive in Ukraine, we reported yesterday that there has been an average of about 4,300 deaths of Ukrainian soldiers since this began, for a total ground gained of less than 50 square miles. Russia says that at least 26,000 Ukrainian servicemen have lost their lives since this began. We have independent journalist with us, Mike Jones. He has been looking into the conditions of Ukrainian soldiers. What is their morale? What is the prospect for these innocent lives? Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So now you live in Russia, but you spend a lot of time taking trips to the Donbass region. You have for months and months. So what can you tell us about the general state of, how would I describe this? State of, you call it psychologically crushing the morale of the army.
Absolutely. These are obviously very tough conditions for both sides. And psychologically speaking, it's always going to be very taxing. But when it comes to the reports that I've been supplied by sources in the Ukrainian law enforcement agencies that are seemingly sympathetic to the Russian cause and want to clearly oust the Kiev regime, you get a good idea of just quite how terrible things are on the Ukrainian side. Now, I've said that things are difficult on both sides, but you have a very different mentality. So the people, particularly from Donbass, if I'll focus on them for just one moment, the people I've spoken to directly, they have this additional layer where they are literally fighting for their homes, particularly if it's Donetsk. The soldiers from there are literally trying to protect their families. This is a level of motivation that can't just be instilled in someone through instruction or training. I'll read from the document where it states the current state of affairs in the unit leads to the lowest possible effectiveness of performance of tasks as intended, which may lead to negative consequences, loss of the defense lines, and complete loss of the combat capability. Many of your viewers watching will no doubt have seen videos circulating, particularly on Telegram, of these poor soldiers being rounded up off the streets, put in the back of vans and sent straight to the front lines. They even have an officer who is responsible for what is called moral and psychological support. And in his own estimations in there, one of these down to just 20% of moral qualities and combat capability.
I mean, this just shines a light on the fact that these soldiers were never ready for a combat like this. Most of them, can you speak to the fact that they're untrained for this?
Absolutely. As we've said, many of them are picked up off the street, even some from camping sites, beaches in Odessa. These people are not equipped or trained to deal with what is the horror of an artillery war, which, of course, it appears the US is losing by resorting to cluster ammunition. But in particularly this case, many of those who have surrendered, and this document doesn't necessarily cover those who have surrendered, just those who voluntarily left their posts, they are claiming they feel that they are being treated by their commanders as simply cannon fodder.
Yes, and we saw a lot of crossover. I think it speaks to the fact that Ukrainians and Russians are so, there's this close bond between the nationalities. During the annexation of Crimea, I think it was something like 80% of the Ukrainian military that was stationed in Crimea voluntarily then just went and said, okay, then I will join the Russian military because that seems to be where the wind is blowing. Those that didn't felt like they had some loyalty to their oath to Kiev, but then it was pointed out that that oath was to a president who was already ousted. And so it doesn't seem, I guess we're not told how easy it is for them to understand, one government towards the other. It's not like a big leap. It's not a traitorous thing, right? Is that a correct assessment?
I think it would be the case for your everyday normal guy, and let's face it, not all of them are the far right ideology. In fact, that's most likely the minority, and they are placed particularly in the battalions responsible for discipline, i.e., not one step back. So most everyday individuals are not that ideologically subscribed to or wish to die for even the aspirations of the Kiev regime. And we see even now in Vilnius with NATO, do the people of Ukraine really want to join NATO? Is it just Zelensky? Because even NATO itself agrees that it's not beneficial for Ukraine. And we're seeing the Ukrainian people pay with their blood as America fights to the last Ukrainian.
And so we have seen on social media that the Russian army has been dropping flyers with instructions for any Ukrainians that want to surrender. Have you seen evidence of that going well for them, that they are allowed a peaceful surrender and then they are treated in coordination with human rights laws?
Yeah, I have. The leaflets, one example I saw was they'd printed sort of fake hryvnias, the local currency, and on there, obviously to attract the attention, on there were the contact details and the radio frequencies in order to contact the Russian units. I've seen at least 3 cases of these units then taking up this offer, meeting at a specified rendezvous, and then giving interviews to camera explaining why they were prompted to surrender and what enabled them to do it. And again, why are you fighting? Now, at this point, 9 times out of 10, I was forced to.
Yeah, they don't really know what they're fighting for, or they don't want to. I mean, who would want to? And we saw just recently an article in Der Spiegel, which was following Ukrainian soldiers. And this also showed that they were dispirited and considering ways to give up and surrender instead of giving up in the heat of battle. So it's becoming increasingly hard for the West to paint this picture of like scrappy, motivated Ukraine. We're being able to see now that it's in fact the opposite. It's, it's lack of respect for human life, Ukraine. That's what this battle represents.
Yeah, certainly on the part of the West, shoveling these men to the front. And it's not to be disrespectful to the Ukrainian servicemen. They have fought heroically, and with tenacity and they've done a very good job. So it's not to be disdainful of these servicemen, But those who see the reality and understand that their lives are being thrown away to what? For Biden's 2024 election so that
Right.
he can look good?
Yeah.
It's really not of benefit to the everyday Ukrainian individual or person. They're seeing their country collapse around them and their economy with it, of course.
Now, these documents that you have, what do you think will come of them?
So it's worth noting that these documents are dated from around April 16th to April 20th. And as dire as the picture that they paint is, given the time that's passed, I think it's fair to speculate that things are very much worse at this point in time.
Especially given the fact that we have these death toll numbers now, which are higher than a normal 6-week period due to the counteroffensive. So thank you so much for bringing us this report on exactly what this means for people being dragged into this. This is a war of governments that's costing real civilian lives. So we look forward to you bringing us more about the actual conflict in Ukraine. Thank you so much. And where can we find these documents if we want to follow them?
These documents are posted at t.me/IEarlGreyTV, and there will be a link to a Telegraph article website where I've included not just the English translation, but also the source material for anyone who may be watching that's fluent in Ukrainian language to just verify for themselves the accuracy of the translation and the details held within. And I look forward to bringing you more reports in the future. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Good to see you as always. All right. So let us know what you think of that in the comments below, and like and share this segment if you'd like to let people know what the real human cost is of this war. And it's just awful. So we have more news to get to. I saw another comment in the show chat saying, "Where is Clayton? I wish you would address it." I have been telling you this is Clayton's last day off. He will be back on Monday. Also, I realized that in that previous segment, I had failed to turn on the light behind me. So those keen-eyed observers, the wheels are off the wagon a little bit without Clayton here. I got to tell you, but we're here. We're still doing it. We have 2 more stories. And so I appreciate your support. Thank you for checking in on Clayton. I did not harm him in any way, at least not, in the physical sense.
That is exactly what someone who harmed him would say. I'm just
Oh, it's true. It's true. We did a story in the newsletter not about 2 years ago about how someone who had taken their own life and then notarized a document saying my spouse didn't do this to me, but they put them in the garage or whatever to continue to collect the Social Security. And so
wow.
It was there was a notarized document saying she needs to keep collecting these checks. If you find this, I just want to let you know that I did this myself. So anyway, nothing of the sort going on here. Clayton's just on holiday and he will be back. Someone was like, is he in a bubble bath every day at 4 p.m.? He's coming back, you guys. Just hold your horses. Hold your horses. You got me for 2 more stories. We can do it. We can do it. We can get through these stories because what we're going to talk about is what? Oh, Twitter files. More evidence of the FBI telling Twitter what you can and cannot say, who can and cannot be on the platform. They just, again, feel super comfortable doing that. Plus, we're going to look at these new Fauci files that show just how much this major story that told us all that COVID didn't come from a lab was doctored by doctors who didn't want us to think COVID came from a lab. There's a few double negatives. I'm going to do my best to break it down. Some of this you've seen and some of this you have not. But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at Aura and thank them for sponsoring today's show. Anyone can find anything on the internet, including your full legal name, your personal email, your home address, phone number, even your relatives. The other day I was searching for someone who works for my father, and I got information that I had no idea I could find because it's really not that hard, you guys. It's more than just one page through of Google. This information is accessible because of data brokers who profit by selling your information to robocallers, telemarketers, spammers, anyone else that wants to learn about you. That's why we're excited to tell you about our show sponsor at Aura. Aura identifies data brokers that are exposing your information and automatically submit opt-out requests on your behalf. They'll even opt you out of junk mail and telemarketing lists. They're like your own personal ninja kind of going around the web and saying, Are you supposed to have that? Are you supposed to have that? Does she want to be on this list? And they'll make sure you're only in the places you want to be. So you can use our link at aura.com/redacted to try it for 2 weeks and see how many data brokers are sharing your information. Again, you can go to that link, or you can click this QR code that you see in the bottom right of the screen. That will also take you to our reference link so that they know that we sent you, not somebody else. Again, you can try it for 14 days for free by heading on over to aura.com/redacted. One more time, that's aura.com/redacted. So let's do a follow-up to the story we did yesterday about how the FBI has been censoring information on behalf of the SBU, that's Ukraine's military. That accusation is supported by a new round of Twitter files from journalist Matt Taibbi. He released this partly in response to the conversation when the report came out showing that the FBI had been working at the behest of the SBU in order to censor information on social media. I guess some people said, that's not really censorship, not a big deal. This is the report we told you about just 2 days ago. Maybe they just were asking politely, which, yeah, they could do. Well, why would your government be asking politely on behalf of another government? That's interesting. And, you know, why is this a thing? Now, a recent court case has said this can no longer be a thing, which we're going to talk about in a second. But I feel like Matt Taibbi just needed to show us even more how cozy this relationship has been between the federal government and social media controlling what we can and cannot say. We know this on this platform. We know that the rules that we are forced to comply with are according to one narrative only, and you're penalized for going outside that box. So we have to tread lightly, walking on eggshells. So let's get to I want to go over this report one more time. So the FBI report that talked about the report saying that the FBI was working at the behest of the SBU, shockingly, did not get a lot of media coverage. Didn't see it on mainstream media, didn't see it on the homepage of the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times. You would think that it would, but no, they are not interested because they can't be critical of Ukraine at all.
Huh. And they don't have the First Amendment over there, so it doesn't really matter, you know? That doesn't apply over there. That's Ukraine.
Sure, yeah, but our media is not interested in telling you what your government is up to with your tax dollars when they're working on behalf. I mean, you can't be a person working for the government on behalf of a foreign country, but I guess you can be an agency that works on behalf of the foreign government. This round of Twitter files shows, again, Elvis Chan. He's the San Francisco agent for the FBI. We've talked about him so many times, seen his name so many times around the Twitter files, and he's telling Twitter what accounts to censor and which ones to boot. Here's the emails we saw just 2 days ago in the first report where he's talking to Facebook. He gave them a whole spreadsheet of accounts that he wanted taken down. Now, Elvis Chan, we've seen a lot communicating with a lot of the main people that are linked in this Twitter file. Here he is when he was deposed last year for the Missouri case that we're going to talk about again in a second. He says that this is the kind of thing the government just regularly shares with social media accounts. Listen.
By information sharing here.
So information sharing is meant, as I mentioned previously, there are two types of information that the U.S. government, specifically the FBI, shares with the social media companies. The first type of information is strategic information, which discusses the tools, tactics, or processes shortened to be TTPs, used by the Russians. The second type of information shared by the U.S. government is tactical information. And when I mean tactical information, I specifically mean indicators or selectors. Both of those are a term of art within the cybersecurity industry. And indicators or selectors include IP addresses, email accounts, social media accounts, website domain names and file hash values.
Okay, so the question is not, was he doing something out of the ordinary by asking social media to censor these accounts? They kept a list of things they didn't like. It's why was the government doing this? Because he says here, this is protocol. We keep lists of these things and then we send them to social media. Yeah, we do that. That was his job. That has been his job. Surely he's been doing it as recently as 2022 from what we've seen. Now, the emails from Matt Taibbi in these Twitter files show him doing this in June of 2020. He says here that here are some accounts we'd like you to take action on, be very greatly appreciated. He says that these accounts are of foreign influence. Now, when Twitter fails to remove these accounts, he follows up. And Twitter apologizes and does what the government wants, is taking down these accounts. And guess who he was working with? Any guesses over at Twitter? It's a monosyllabic first and last name. Any guesses?
Yoel
Roth. Yes.
That's what
That's the guy. This is the guy who has told us over and over again that the Hunter Biden laptop story was just a judgment call. We're going to get back to that in a second. But he's saying, I apologize. We're going to fix this issue. When the government says, why haven't you taken these down? We told you about them. You're supposed to do that. Now, do they have to do that? Or why do they do that? In the report we saw last week in the judge's ruling, it said that social media companies do this because of the veiled threat of antitrust regulation. So they said, no, sorry, we're going to do this. Now, remember how he had said that the Hunter Biden laptop story was a tough call and that it sort of set off some alarm bells, but it wasn't an obvious, thing. Remember when he said that? I'm just going to remind you of that and play this back.
We learn about DC leaks, and we learn about the intersection between APT-28, a unit of Russian military intelligence, a hacking group. And so the morning of the Hunter Biden story in the New York Post happens. And it was weird, right? We didn't know what to believe. We didn't know what was true. There was smoke. And ultimately for me, it didn't reach a place where I was comfortable removing this content from Twitter. But it set off every single one of my finely tuned APT-28 hack and leak campaign alarm bells.
So it looked possibly problematic.
Everything about it looked like a hack and leak.
That's a lie. He's telling a lie because we've seen emails between him and Elvis Chan warning him about this story coming out before he had seen it in the New York Post. We've seen copious email exchanges between Yoel Roth and Elvis Chan. He was not acting on his own judgment. He never was. He was getting instructions from the federal government. He's lying here by saying this was a tough one. It was a personal conundrum. It was an existential crisis. That's not true. This Twitter files from Matt Taibbi shows that the accounts that Agent Chan told him about were not even necessarily foreign actors, and Twitter couldn't verify that. See here, it says this one that they told us about came back as Canadian. And in fact, Yoel Roth actually then reaches back out to the FBI and says, can you tell me why these accounts were flagged? It's okay if you can't tell me, but I'd like you to tell me. He says, it wasn't clear cut on this. And so I recognize the Bureau's ability to share sourcing information. But if you can tell me why we did that, you guys, I don't know what to say about that. He's literally saying, I'll do what you tell me to. It doesn't set off his whatever finely tuned things that he told Kara Swisher about. He's doing what he's told. There's no setting off finely tuned alarm bells. It's I'll do what you tell me, even though it doesn't set off any stinking finely tuned alarm bells. What a liar. It's a lie. And I cannot abide that. You going to say something, David? You're poking in you want to say something. Okay. All right. Anyway, the FBI didn't have any burden of proof here. This is just the FBI absolutely deciding that it will make things happen in the world without having to take something to court, without having to get a grand jury, without just deciding it should be like this. We're going to go into social media and make it be like this. They should not be able to change society without due process, and especially not act on behalf of foreign governments. Now, again, this is the kind of thing that is not supposed to happen anymore, because on the 4th of July, we got a ruling from a federal judge that U.S. government agencies can no longer reach out to social media companies in order to censor content. The Justice Department appealed that ruling, saying, please let us keep doing that. We'd like it. But the judge denied that appeal. So it is now supposed to be law that they can't do things like this anymore. What Agent Chan just told them that they do, they're not supposed to. Whether or not they've stopped, it seems like they were really addicted to doing this. So I don't see how they could just stop so easily, but they're not supposed to.
Could you imagine, though, if, like, what would happen if, let's say, like an American company like YouTube, if the SBU was just directly going to them and having them censor Americans, like that, there would be an absolute just like hellstorm from that. Yes. But if you add the FBI as an intermediary, then it becomes okay. That just blows my mind. Like it's the same thing, but you're just adding the FBI in it just for, I guess, to lessen the blow. I don't know, make it more legal.
Right. I mean, the FBI can do really amazing research. They have a lot of resources at their disposal. They know who they're working on behalf of. The SBU is typically not the good guy. They have to know why they're doing it, because there is a war machine behind it.
Well, you can read the FBI's reports like on the SBU. Like, yes. Remember we did that on the show like a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the State Department too. Yeah. They know who they're dealing with. And this report that came out 2 days ago saying, but they missed that there were Russian actors inside of them. They don't do that. There's no like, oops, there's Russians in there. We missed that one. We missed that connection, who we're working on behalf of. They know who is who. So, a bigger question is why? Why would they do this when they know what they know? Why is it okay? And have they stopped doing it now that they no longer can? So let us know what you think of that in the chat. It is just, again, more of a smoking gun that the media seems very uncurious about. But I am supremely curious about it, because not only how it affects us and what we can say on our channels, but how it affects the conversation, and why some people seem to be A-okay with this happening and being censored on social media, and some people do not. So let us know what you think of that. We have one more story to get to today. It does pertain to COVID, but we're going to give it a good heave-ho here on YouTube, because we're not intending to say anything that violates the terms of service of YouTube, but you never know. But it is about the Senate subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic, and how a study about the lab leak origin was doctored by Dr. Fauci and his doctor friends. So we're going to get to that in just a minute. But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at Patriots, because in a startling description, the UN food chief warned the world with the words, knocking on famine's door. He called what we're facing a perfect storm of a perfect storm. And he's not alone. Barron's published that a food shortage could be coming even to the U.S. Farmers see it too. John Boyd Jr., a fourth-generation farmer, told Fox News that we're going to see empty food shelves in the coming months. That's why getting survival food is more important now than ever. You can create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriots survival food kits. It's not ordinary food. We're talking about good for 25 years, super survival food. Hand-packed in a family-owned facility in the USA and giving jobs to over 200 Americans. And they have different delicious breakfasts, lunch, dinner. You can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. Just add boiling water, simmer, and serve. So right now, for the next few days, listeners of Redacted will get a 10% off their first order at 4patriots.com by using our code REDACTED. Now use the digit 4patriots.com and use our code REDACTED to start researching about your stockpile today, because it's always prudent to have an emergency kit, you guys. This is the time to start thinking about this. Once again, it's 4patriots.com and use our code REDACTED. All right, well, a new report from the Senate U.S. House of not the Senate, from the U.S. House of Representatives Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic shows that Dr. Anthony Fauci and his colleagues heavily influenced a paper on the origins of COVID in order to steer the national conversation away from a possible lab leak. Now, in terms of censorship, this was a very successful project. We were not supposed to say that COVID leaked from a lab. It was called racist and conspiracy theory. When we were told to follow the science, it's interesting because now we have proof that the doctors were, in fact, making up the science, especially as it came to the origin of the COVID pandemic. This is the third time we've seen information about this very paper and Fauci's fingerprints all over it. I was going to say footprints. Fingerprints is probably more accurate, but who knows? And it keeps just getting more and more incriminating for Fauci and friends. In March, the committee released its first report, and what they showed us, and we reported here, was that Dr. Fauci and his colleagues commissioned and influenced the results of this study that showed that COVID could not have come from a lab. Here was their conclusion. Our analysis clearly show that COVID is not a laboratory construct or a purposely manipulated virus. Okay, this paper was off-quoted as basically the final word on COVID was not a lab leak. We also saw that WHO doctors and also both Dr. Fauci and Dr. Francis Collins had been given the chance to see drafts of the paper. We knew that. We also knew that they influenced this paper and that another doctor, one of their buddies, Jeremy Farrar, who is now chief scientist at the World Health Organization, not only was integral in the development of this paper, but proposed these edits to the paper's conclusions. In an email, he said, hey, love your paper, so great. Can I please micromanage and give you an edit? Instead of saying it's unlikely that SARS came from a lab, can you please say it's improbable? So he's not one of the study's authors. He's just reading it and basically changing their conclusion or writing their conclusion. That is really unethical in the world of academic papers, but he felt comfortable to do that. In May, another report was leaked showing just how the Pentagon thought that this paper, also this Nature journal that we're talking about, which was used as the final word, Pentagon doctors had said this is not good science. Here was a leaked paper from two doctors at the Pentagon, Commander Jean-Paul Christian, a Navy doctor, and Dr. Robert Cutlip, a research scientist at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and both concluded that the no lab leak paper was far from conclusive and that the government should not make decisions based on this paper because it just wasn't very good. Well, now we know just how far and wide that paper was circulated in order to control the no lab leak conversation. Here's from the report today. It says, since this proximal origin was published, it's been accessed 5.84 million times. That makes it the third most attention of any paper of similar age across all journals, and the second most attention of any paper in a similar age in Nature Medicine. And it's received the fifth most attention of any paper ever tracked, ever. This is one of the single most impactful and influential scientific papers in history, and it expressed conclusions that were not based on sound science, but instead assumptions. So why? Why was this paper such a banger? It was a box office hit, you would call it. And it was based on junk science and politics, as we're going to show you. Who sent it around so much? Who elevated this content? We know the media did because they were able to use it to shut down conversations, social media as well. Why did this become such a banger paper? Now, the report says something that I hadn't heard before, namely that Dr. Fauci had warned Dr. Andreessen, one of the paper's studies, that if you're going to write this paper now, if you conclude that COVID came from a lab, we're going to have to contact law enforcement. He expands on this later, but this is interesting. Why is he saying this now? If he thinks that even there is some kind of possibility that law enforcement needs to be involved, do you think he should wait for an academic paper which he's influencing? That doesn't seem very ethical. Now, here is the email where he says that if this is, lab leak theory goes through, then we're going to have to call the authorities. And he says in the USA, it'd be the FBI, and in the UK, it'd be MI5. So he's saying, look, this is going to really be bad for us. We're going to have to call the police if this is what you find. So run along, do the paper, and let's hope you don't get there, is what I'm saying. Because if law enforcement needs to know about this, you don't wait until but do your homework first. That doesn't seem right to me. Does it seem right to you?
Yes, the house is on fire, but I'm not going to call the fire department until it hits the roof. Once it gets close to the roof, then we'll call the fire department.
Right. Yeah. I'm curious what he thinks that the Justice Department will do about this. But I guess, there are people there he wants to protect from having to be involved with the Justice Department. The same author, Dr. Andreessen, she found research initially in her conversation with her co-authors of this study showing that gain of function had been happening in China. And I'm choosing not to show this to you on the screen, but the other author then responded to her, F word, this is bad. So they have already, you can tell, an agenda that they don't want, that one conclusion is bad, one conclusion is good, and let's steer ourselves to the one that we want. They went on to author this paper asserting the very opposite. In a few months, even though they have, we know they have some data showing that there was gain of function done in China. Dr. Andreessen even wrote at one point that the point of the paper was to disprove the leak. So again, she's not following the science, but making it up. She wrote in February 8th, 2020, our main work over the past couple of weeks has been focused on trying to disprove any type of lab leak theory. So she's not looking into the lab leak theory. She's specifically going in to debunk it. She says, but we're at a crossroads with the scientific evidence. It's not very conclusive. So she's not happy with being able to doctor up this report. This communication is also new. The two papers' authors saying, yeah, but, we're going to have to do this because can you imagine the politics? At one, she says, I'm going to say the S word, just so you know, given the shit show that would happen if anyone seriously accused the Chinese of accidental release, my feeling is we should say, given there is no evidence of a specifically engineered virus, we cannot possibly distinguish between natural evolution and escape. So we are content with ascribing it to natural processes. And she falls, it's not her that said that, it was Andrew Rem, but another of the paper's author. And she says, yeah, totally agree. I hate when politics is injected into science, but it's impossible not to. No, that's wrong. It's not impossible not to inject politics into science. Those two things can be mutually exclusive. And so that's a smoking gun of an email, wouldn't you say? You wouldn't like that from a peer-reviewed study that you're then using to make basis of, censorship, policy, all of that stuff. It just goes on and on with these kind of, conclusions about how Dr. Fauci knew his name was used to pitch the study to the journal, how him and his friends were influencing the conclusions and how they were going towards one conclusion and ignoring all other research that would indicate a lab leak, an actual lab leak.
Not only that, you got the lab leak, but also they were putting magazine articles out to discredit other scientists that were saying ways to deal with the pandemic. Just any narrative that went against what they wanted, regardless of what area it came from, the lab leak, the protocol for getting through it, it had to be one way, and that was the only way. And everything else that was outside of that one way, they tried everything they could to discredit it.
Yeah, that's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And so then when you consider the reach of this paper and how it was used to influence policy and how we were told that, oh no, we are the science, we're doing really good science, you need to follow the science, it does not garner any kind of confidence in anything else that Fauci and his team of Bethesda boys, as they referred to them, were doing. One of the reasons that maybe is posited that they wanted to draw attention away from this lab leak theory was because the U.S. was participating in gain of function research in China, which was supposed to have stopped during the Obama administration, but was still greenlit under Dr. Fauci. So that's maybe why they were doing it. We can come up with other reasons about why they were doing it. What we know now is that they did it. And so it brings up questions about what else were they lying to us about? What other science were they making up? What other scientific studies were they ignoring so that they could get to one conclusion over another? Again, it doesn't inspire confidence at all. It's not a scientific paper. If you write, it's fiction if you just choose what you want to include in order to get to the science, the conclusion that you want. That should have been, given that there were Pentagon doctors who already were poking holes at this should have happened at the peer review stage. And why it didn't, I don't know. And I think it's just worth reminding that this paper was the basis for censoring social media and calling people crazy for even hypothesizing the lab leak, such as this Senator Tom Cotton. They said he was fringe for repeating this COVID origins story. We also had Tucker Carlson. They said he was debunked about this lab leak theory. He wasn't. New York Times COVID reporter deletes a tweet. They said it was racist, the lab leak theory. So, I mean, it created a lot of frenzy on a really terrible scientific paper when we were told, no, we're the science, follow the science, trust us with the science. That trust was misused. And I feel like this is further proof of that. So let us know what you think in the comments section below. Well, and yeah, go ahead, David.
I want to know. This is Philip. I want to know what crime. Like that's the thing that what's weird to me is when they're basically threatening them to call law enforcement. Like, but I really want to know like for what? Like what the proposed crime is. Like is this like referencing like compromat? Like do they have blackmail like stuff on them, or is there like what law would they be breaking in doing scientific research?
No, I don't think that he's saying we'll call them on you. I think he means we'll call them about the fact that there may have been like foreign actors involved in the release of a virus. I don't know exactly what they would. More
like we would have to call the FBI or somebody more than the law enforcement, unless they consider that law enforcement. But yeah, I think it was more that okay, if this is true, we're going to have to get a lot more people involved, and it's going to make it a lot stickier, and this is going to be a big ordeal, and just kind of like making it seem.
Yeah, but like I guess it's the word that they use. It's law enforcement, not like the State Department. It's not like he specifically says law enforcement. Like what would law enforcement have to do with it? Like I could see if we'd have to contact the State Department. If it was a foreign actor that they figured that it could cause an international incident, you wouldn't get law enforcement involved in that. That would be the State Department.
The State Department or the president. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like, to me, it's like, I guess maybe I'm just reading it wrong, but like to me, it sounds like it was a threat. Like they're basically, because you call law enforcement to arrest people. You don't call law enforcement to protect the country against international embarrassment.
Right. And who is he writing to here? He's writing to
Dr. Anderson.
No, in this email, he's saying Jeremy. So he's talking to Jeremy Farrar.
Oh, gotcha.
And he says, I just got off the phone with Dr. Anderson. But he had also told her that, Dr. Anderson, if we find out that this is a lab leak, we're going to have to call the authorities. And then he says to Jeremy Farrar, we'll have to report it to appropriate authorities. Again, this is, if you think that there's any concern about this, you need to bring it to authorities anyway, not until like after we see the paper. Because you're influencing the paper. You obviously have no confidence that the paper's going anywhere, right? So he knows that he's going to lead the conclusion of the paper. So the paper is not going to prove bubkiss. And so, yeah, that would mean that he's saying this is going to get sticky. We're going to have to bring in law enforcement. So let's just continue to go down this path. I guess that's maybe the way I read it. Not that like any one of them would be in trouble with law enforcement, but I don't know.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I feel too.
Yeah, I guess.
But I remember us covering a story as well where there were several doctors that initially had said that all roads were leading to the lab leak theory, but then those doctors changed their opinion, and then their grants got funded. Their research got funded with huge grants. We covered that on the show.
Yeah, we had a Senate testimony about that. You're right. What were you going to say, Philip?
Well, I'm just still hung up on the words used of law enforcement, like, and how that just I just can't I can't let that go, because it just that to me is just absolutely a threat, because it's not it's just the way it's worded, like law enforcement.
Yeah.
Like I can't imagine what law enforcement would do if not to arrest somebody. That's because that's what they do.
And you would think then, because she's not, Dr. Andreessen is not going to be arrested. She's just taken an assignment. You would think, unless she was sort of connected with this gain of function thing, that it wasn't a threat to her. It was just a threat to somebody. But you would think someone in the room would be like, well, if it's that serious, we need to run it up the chain of commands right now. We need to tell, I don't know. Yeah. And him saying like MI5 in the UK would also need to be notified.
Well,
why them?
I wonder if that's
why the UK?
If it's basically a way of saying I'm gonna have to get law enforcement involved, and anybody that's in the know that's in that thread is like, oh, that's gonna lead back to me. Oh, that's gonna lead back to me, and then that'll lead back to you because we have this that you sent this email that they're not talking about. It's just like a veiled, hey, remember, you are connected to this, just like Alex is, just like I am. And if we get law enforcement, they're going to be going through our stuff, and maybe I that's how I see it. Like it's just going to be a lot of red tape for us. I don't see it as like somebody's going to get arrested right then, but.
Or is it all of us, because we've been ignoring the Obama administration's directive on gain of function? So then we're all in trouble. So like it's the code of La Casa Nostra or whatever. How is it? La Casa Nostra. How do you say it?
La Castra Nostra?
Yes. What is it? The Godfather, right? I don't know. Anyway.
Yes.
Okay. Maybe I shouldn't have tried that one.
Like that.
Okay.
No, it's all good.
But you know what I mean.
Now my brain's like, wait a minute.
All right. Somebody's going to know. Somebody's going to know in our chat. Okay. Yeah. So this is, again, it's a big smoking gun. Media doesn't give two craps about it at all. They're fine with what was done to all of us during the COVID pandemic. But I care very much, because this is indication of very disingenuous science. And so what else? What else was behind the decisions of Fauci and friends, the Bethesda boys? So let us know what you think. And let us know what you think that FBI bit is. Like, what's that about? Yeah. Okay. Why would the head of the NIH need to get law enforcement involved if the paper goes the way they don't want to go? It's very strange, very strange. All right, well, that's going to do it for us today. We will see you back here on Monday. Remember, we will be a two-person team here in this studio on Monday when Clayton gets back over the weekend. I want to say thank you to Philip and David and Grim for holding my hand over the last 2 weeks so that I could run a solo show. It's been a lot of work, but it's been absolutely a pleasure, and I couldn't have done it without those three. Yeah, we did it, you guys. We did it. That feels like something to be proud of. Yeah. All right. I don't want to do it anymore, but we did it. Oh, yeah. 4 segments a day just running through my little brain is a lot, and it might explode. So tomorrow I'm going to go stare at the wall with my mouth agape.
You should just go play with your bees just all day. Just go out there with the bees. I heard that there's healing properties from even the air that comes off their wings.
Yeah.
So
they're pretty great. I do need to harvest some of my honey hives, so I will do that.
I used to, when I would get to the end of a term when I was in college, and I would always like load up to like 19 to 21 credit hours. I was always very, very busy. And so when I'd get like done with finals, I'd always go home and then just like, I wouldn't turn anything on. I would just go home, shut the door, and lay down on the floor for about 4 to 8 hours and just lay there. Like not napping, just laying there in silence. So maybe do that. That's what I would do. I might do that right now.
I have a 6-year-old, so I can't do that. But I'll do that while she's asleep. That sounds like a good idea. So anyway, all right. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Remember to please subscribe to the newsletter. It is free. It's at redacted.inc. And we'll be back here as a team with more on Monday. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. Bye then.